Welcome back. This has been my first return episode after a bit of a hiatus. If you still exist and you're listening to this, thank you. Um, Today I'm joined by an old and getting older friend, John Doney. We were in college together for some time and then went off into the world to see what we could do. But
hmm
John, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself and your new endeavor here?
Frank, thanks for having me on, and it's great to be able to catch up with you. And I know you're going at it still in music, so that's really exciting to hear. Encouraging, because a lot of people wind up going into music in college, and then they wind up doing something completely outside of that, and that's fine. That's understandable. But I'm always encouraged when I get to talk with somebody who continues to plug away in the music industry. So I'm president and CEO of the Arizona Pops Orchestra, and I'm also general manager of Symphony Arlington. So a lot of management and a lot of different things that I do to make sure that these orchestras grow financially, but that we have good programs too. Artistic product is so important these days
Right.
to get people in the seats. So I'm I'm just really excited to be able to be in the orchestra business. I always aspired to be a musician in an orchestra, but then it evolved. And of course, I had my time in the Army bands. I was two enlistments and two deployments. So I ventured out after that to actually Interlochen Center for the Arts.
Mhm.
I took a paid internship as the orchestra librarian for the top orchestra. So that's how I ventured out of the military music side and into the civilian music side. But I had goals, so I think that's important to state that it wasn't just uh, aimlessly meandering out into the music world,
Right.
not knowing where I wanted to go. So anyway, that's kind of a bit in a nutshell. But
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Uh, Likewise, I'm happy to see, like you mentioned, seeing people keep at it in music. This is, it seems like a career of attrition, right? And just
Mhm.
some people get fed up despite their talent and they go on to something else. And again, that's fine, but it is nice to talk to other colleagues who've been at it, which is part of why
Well,
we're doing this. So,
I think the great thing um, with you, Frank, that I really admire. I say this that you continue to teach, and that's so important. It's a vital aspect. Obviously, you see these professionals on stage, but everybody's got to start somewhere. So the fact that you continue to take students from where they're at any level, and you impart your wisdom, and obviously you've had plenty of performance experiences. I remember you were out in Europe at one point, isn't that
Mhm.
right? When I
That's
was
right.
actually stationed in Germany.
If I'd stayed connected enough during that time, we could have connected. But it's fun that we had some
Yeah.
intersecting experience there. Where was there a particular base you were stationed at over there?
Yeah, it was Wiesbaden Army Airfield, and it was with the 1st Armored Division Band in the Army. And again, I deployed, but I had some time in Germany at least. So this is an important point too, and I know you are the same. To get out there and listen to so many different groups, to absorb all that you can, because part of learning isn't just a one-on-one with a teacher. It's hearing great music and great orchestras and great ensembles and um, all different genres of music too. So that way you can expand. And I think that's something I want to mention about the Army bands that really I take from. I was in brass quintet, and that was a small group we used quite a bit in deployment, so we could travel from base to base and do ceremonies and all types of gigs. Um, but it's important to be able to be versatile. So in college, you train almost like a classical route, but in order to be a well-rounded musician, maybe learn how to improv. And that was something I didn't really
Yeah.
um, know a whole lot about. I dabbled with it, um, but I know you probably have been in the same boat too.
Oh yeah. So for our listeners, we the school that John and I met at was perhaps a little limited in its exploration of musical genres, if I can put it that
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
So each of us in our own way spent time branching out after that experience to become, like you said, more well-rounded musicians. And I think to some extent, like a little more ourselves, a more complete self.
Hmm.
Because artistically, yeah, I think the most honest music we can make is when we're really fully ourselves. So to get back
Yes.
to that and understand yourself from these different artistic perspectives is important, I think.
Yeah, it's about expression, really, what you're talking about, Frank, to be able to express yourself in a certain way. And I think sometimes we can get caught up. A lot of people think that you have to be perfect in performance. Now, it's nice if you can, get to that point, but have fun doing what you're doing, because if you don't, well, that's why I think a lot of people venture out of music because they feel a certain amount of pressure,
Yeah, the pressure.
and you want to have a certain standard, but if you make mistake here and there, okay, life goes on. That's the important thing to. And music is supposed to be an expression, and it's a gift too. But I think it's important. Again, you want to hear all sorts of ensembles, like I was talking about, and being stationed in Europe, that was something I think was key, because yes, I've traveled around the U.S. and I've heard different groups in the U.S., but to hear European orchestras and different ensembles, I think the coolest experience I had, Frank, was when I was able to take a trip from Frankfurt, Wiesbaden, that area. That's where I was stationed. But to take a train from there to Berlin, one, I don't know about you, but I love traveling on the trains in Europe.
They, yeah, trains in Germany have been a pretty nice experience. We'll
Yeah, and that's all.
revisit at some
I,
point.
yeah, I'd kick back and read a book on the train, maybe have coffee or something to eat, and I'd have my what was at that point, iPod, I guess, on,
Yes.
headphones on, listening to
Yeah.
all types of
Historical
music, because
device.
that's,
The
yes,
historical device. Yeah.
yeah, yes, everything's changing so fast. But I think that just, you know, kind of taking in the experience and then being able to actually go hear the Berlin Philharmonic. Of course, as you know, their digital concert hall is the best in the world,
Yeah.
one of the best.
Amazing space. At least
Yeah, and
when I was there. Yeah. Who knows now? But they it's nice. It's nice that the country as a whole seems to put so much attention into the arts.
hmm yeah, and I think seeing how much they care about the arts, and in some ways, I wish that we were less fast paced in this country, to be able to sit back and enjoy more arts and culture and time with family and friends, conversations like we're having.
Mhm.
But that's something I learned a lot about. But being able to go hear the Berlin Philharmonic a handful of times, seeing conductors like Zubin Mehta conduct them, and um, Leonidas Kavakis was a
Okay.
violin that I got to hear solo with Berlin Phil, and then I've heard them play, um, some major works. Maybe it was Shostakovich or Mahler or something like that. Um, but actually, I was able to connect with Klaus Vollendorf, who's a retired horn in the Berlin Phil. So this was when I was in Germany. I connected with him over email. I was surprised he got back to me so quickly. And I was able to play for him, get some advice about that. And and then he invited me to just stick around backstage. They were doing a live recording, uh, and it was earlier in the day, and I think they had something going on later that night. But I was there in the back just watching them, observing, and it was so neat to see the precision. But you know, it's amazing the nerves of steel that some of these musicians have too under pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the level of world-class orchestra, and I think at least personally, that's where I've seen some of that pressure emerge. Like when you're in school and seeing these people, and then the pressure that's put on you in these like these other performance roles, like, oh, well, if it's this hard as an undergrad, what can I expect trying
Hmm.
to win an audition or anything like that? Um, but
But I think it's key, and you would know this too, that you have to have other outlets too. It's not all about music. You know, I love sports, by the way. I love keeping up with all that. I know you have your uh, other hobbies too, with knives,
yes.
obviously. I remember you had an affinity for swords too. I remember
Oh,
you
yes.
showing me with
Yeah. No,
swords.
like I said earlier, you have to be who you are. That's the most honest expression
Hmm.
of who you are. So, and you're alluding to it now, like um, the complete self, even with all your branches. You're not a pole, you're a tree. You know.
Yes, that's a really good analogy. I like that. That's what I admired about you, Frank. You're always yourself, and that's not easy to find. Um, you know, we especially when you talk about music, we're all trying to fit into the stereotype.
Right.
But if you're not yourself, you're not going to have fun. You're not going to enjoy what you do. And again, that's really, yes, there's that level of precision I talk about, say, with the Berlin Phil or any major orchestra or any even smaller budget orchestra. Um, the level of precision is important, but again, have to have other outlets so that way it's you don't make it such a big deal. So I think a lot of these musicians they get to the point that, and I know it's like this for me in the Army band, you just perform so much that
Yeah.
it almost comes natural to do um, a really good job, and you get to a point it's like, okay, I'm just doing another performance and I love it, and um, I find something to focus on, maybe a goal within that performance. Even
Mhm.
if, say, like when I was in the Army, I'd play a ceremony and there wouldn't be that many spectators sometimes, especially when I was deployed. So,
Yeah.
I'm focusing on something in the music, like how can I blend in better with the group? I think that's, not to try to always make myself the focal point. In fact, that's important not to do it hardly at all. It's about the group. So if I can blend in with the group, that's where I really want to be and feel most comfortable. And I never viewed myself as a great solo type player,
Right.
but I always felt strong as an ensemble, like brass quintet and larger.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that because I've met a lot of people and I've had this experience myself going through music school. You're at some level you're taught as if you're going to be a soloist, and then learning
Hmm.
the skill of ensemble is a different thing. And I've met
Yeah.
I've met people who just never got out of the perpetual soloist stage, and
Hmm.
I mean, they're skilled musicians, but they're a little less fun to play with in a group, right?
Right.
And I kind of circling back to the your administrative role with these
Yeah.
orchestra. Like, again, we're part of a whole, and you think of an
Hmm.
orchestra and people think first of the performers, but it takes this whole infrastructure to have this entity to present to the world.
Yeah.
But what? Was there a specific kind of turning point where it's like you went from performance goals to kind of more administrative, organizational, or was it kind of a gradual thing? Like what led you to this path?
Yeah, it was gradual. Uh, I think the best decision I made when it comes to career was going right from college into the Army bands. So 2 months prior to graduation, I signed in the delayed entry program for the U.S. Army, and that allowed me to finish the final 2 months of school. And I worked other jobs, so I was doing a job for probably a month, and then I went to basic training,
Right.
and so went through basic. So you learn to be a soldier and do a lot of other things than just music, and then uh, and then the music aspect came into
Mopping
play.
outside in the rain.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things. In fact, I I'm going to divert a little bit here. I wound up getting a staph infection when I was in basic training.
Oh
So
Lord.
it's like 12 weeks of training, and I did not want to get held back. I didn't want to be there any longer. So luckily, it was during a point in training. There was a bit of a lull, which is kind of odd to say in basic, but yeah, the training wasn't a physical, so much physical type training at that point. It was more, classes learning about land navigation. So
Gotcha.
it's something that we kind of just did throughout, but that was the real focus. So anyway, all that to say, I got it taken care of medically, but I mean, my leg was swollen for probably
Jeez.
a few days, and so I wound up pushing myself, um, to recover as quick as I could because we had a PT test, a physical training test coming up, and those were important, obviously, to be able to part of graduation, a huge requirement to meet a certain standard. So anyway, all that to say that, and this goes into music as well. Have a goal and keep striving for it to push for a certain goal, musically, if you will. Um, and so I did that though with this particular issue that I encountered, and I didn't actually get held back. So I graduated with my class, and then from there it was on to Norfolk, Virginia. By the way, basic was in Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Okay.
So I'm at least familiar with the conditions, and it was a pretty heated summer for sure. But then it was Norfolk, Virginia. So I was there in the fall and winter, so I got the opposite of the weather that you'll get in the
Yeah.
summer in South Carolina. So I kind of had the all around training, I think, to as a musician. It's 6 months of training at the Army School of Music. Some people do it in three. I didn't really want to rush, didn't see a need to. I'm enjoying learning, and that's an important part of the process too. I think for a lot of people to understand, it's a process, it's a learning process. Whatever you're doing, it's not going to come instantly, and you know that, Frank. Obviously, you teach all these students at different levels, but I think that I learned a lot of different things. Like I say, not just music, but soldiering, and I was able to get to my first duty station there in Germany, and I was assigned um, to the brass quintet as my small ensemble. Of course, we had the larger ensemble, and I enjoyed watching a lot of the other musicians, interacting with people from all different colleges and schools. So I'm not just in a bubble, I'm seeing people with so much talent, more talent than I have, obviously. I have a certain level, but I think that I sat back and enjoyed, and then just made myself part of the team, as you alluded to, and took on other responsibilities that were assigned, such as being in charge of vehicles for our unit. So we have administrative duties. And then I later actually wound up in the library. So I was handling music. So that came into play later. And my second enlistment, by the way, I met my wife. I got out after one enlistment for a couple of years, and I met my wife, and I decided, I really miss performing music. So I hopped back in. Didn't have to go back through basic and music school, so that was nice. And then I wound up at Fort Riley in Kansas,
Okay.
and that's actually near KSU, so Manhattan, Kansas, that is. And so that was pretty intense. That's the First Infantry Division band. So
Hmm.
here I was, First Armored Division band, First Infantry Division band. Um, so I wound up deploying with that band as well, part of the first wave to go back. Um, and Operation Inherent Resolve, that was my second deployment. The first one, by the way, was Operation Iraqi Freedom, transition to Operation New Dawn. And I
Hmm.
played in some big ceremonies for that with Vice President at that at that point. That was, and also, Frank, something else this is something about music that's key too, and you know this. It'll take you places if you really
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're willing to venture out. So I wound up playing for a naturalization ceremony in Baghdad at a palace there on the main base in Baghdad, and it was actually um, the palace of Saddam Hussein that we overtook.
Hmm.
Say we, the U.S. Army and U.S. Armed Forces, and so anyway, we had ceremonies there, and that it was a nice palace, as you can imagine. But I thought that was the coolest thing to play for a naturalization ceremony, see people gain their citizenship, and um, to be a part of that. And
Okay.
then the change from Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was more of a combat operation, to the more peaceful Operation New Dawn. So my band wound up playing there, and it was on C-SPAN and different networks too, right there in the palace. And Vice President, it was Biden at that time. Um, I mean, here I am up in the front. Of course, the cameras weren't really panned that direction, but I was sitting like 5 feet from, these dignitaries.
Yeah.
I thought this is kind of surreal. You never know where music's going to take you. Who you're
Yeah.
going to meet. And so, anyway, all that to say that I did a lot of different things, and I did librarian for the for that band, and also personnel management, and
Okay.
that came in to play as well. So I decided to get out after that enlistment, and I wound up going to Interlochen Center for the Arts, which I talked about, taking a paid internship. And I'm married, and it didn't pay a whole lot, but I had a goal, and my wife and I talked about it. Obviously, don't want to do something that will be so complicated and difficult for
Yeah.
her. So,
Overly disruptive.
yeah. So she actually went with me, and it was a couple of months there in the summer of 2016, and she was a coffee barista. So I really applaud her for just venturing out with me and doing something unique. So there we
Yeah.
were at Interlochen Center for the Arts, and I met Joanne Falletta. I met Jung Ho Pak, and a number of other conductors and concert masters, such as Martin Chalifour of the LA Philharmonic. I think he's retiring or retired at this point.
Hmm.
And Dennis Kim, he was really, and both of those concert masters were really nice. All of them were, but those two I connected with, and they agreed to be references for me. And Joanne Falletta, same thing, Jung Ho as well. So these were key part of my career, but in the process, I was able to do librarian work for the top orchestra at Interlochen. So, it's a bit different. I'm like 32 years old at that point, and I'm doing librarian work for these incredibly talented uh, students, around 18 years old, and
Yeah.
they're from all parts of the world. But it's important to understand that part of leadership is a servant's attitude, no matter who you're working with. And these students obviously aspire to, you know, be professionals. And so I wanted to do the best I could for them or for anybody for that matter. So it's important, I think, for people out there to understand, uh, that leadership isn't just being in a position, it's being able to demonstrate a servant's heart and care for people beyond music and talk with them, on a personal level too, not in professional, obviously is important too. But that was a great summer for my wife and I to be able to do that. And in the process, I wound up getting a few free coffee drinks from my wife. So she kept me going. Here I am, like in the middle of the night sometimes doing music preparation for the next week because it's so intense. You're working on music nonstop. So that coffee, I tell you, that
Yeah.
really did help me a lot.
For a moment, I
So
thought you
anyway,
said you
Frank.
were gonna. For a moment, I thought you were gonna say you got another staph infection, but
No, thank goodness. Oh my goodness.
uh,
That was a rough point
yeah.
there in the army. But
Is it
um, so
real?
anyway, it evolved, Frank, and then wound up going to a year after Interlochen. So it was a difficult transition for a year. I want to say it was not, and I knew it was going to be difficult from military to civilian. But again, keep the goal in mind, I think is important for a lot of people to understand that it's not going to happen right away. It's a process. So the Cape Symphony, Jung Ho Pak, who I worked with at Interlochen, he wound up hiring me to be the librarian for the Cape Symphony there
Hmm.
in Massachusetts. So compared to the BSO, the budget is extremely different,
Yeah.
but it's the second largest budget orchestra in Massachusetts. I think it was like 3, 4 million. And so I learned so much from the musicians there. Um, I love, and there's a lot of great musicians up there. Obviously, you've got New England Conservatory,
Hmm.
a big school, and Berkeley, and then a lot of the musicians came up from New York, New
Right.
Jersey,
Right.
um, just all over that New England region, and Massachusetts. Obviously, that's huge as well. But um, I really enjoyed my relationship, growing that relationship with the concert master. His interesting guy. He loves the Red Sox. He goes to so he has another outlet, but J Cosmos Lee. That was his name, J Cosmos Lee. That's what he went by. And we had this really good rapport. So as a librarian, that was huge. You have to establish, no matter what position, yeah, that team mindset. You can't just be um, in a box and do play music and that's it. I think you need to have the mindset that I want to get to know people and grow outside of music in that relationship. So he's somebody I could text and I know he'd get back to me fairly quick. It's been some time since that point. Um, so Frank, after the Cape Symphony, we wound up moving to Tennessee to be near family. I worked for a small music company, Stockton Music Services, and that was like production librarian work. So I put orchestration books together. So I did that a couple of years, and I'm appreciative that Dan Stockton hired me to do that. I learned a lot, and then that transitioned into the Florida Orchestra, where I did a whole wide range of different work. So it was like library, personnel. I was almost, because of personnel, it was like human resources was added in there with financial because
Yeah.
dealing with payroll and
Right.
onboarding of musicians.
Yeah.
So,
So all those
and then
icky things that people don't think of when they think of the orchestra lifestyle, like you still have to keep it running.
right. Yeah, it's behind the scenes like you're talking about. There's so much involved that you don't see, but it's like the musicians on stage. Um, they get a lot of praise, and that's well deserved. But there's so much in the importance of roles behind the scenes that you can't forget about. And and then I wound up doing development with fundraising side of things for the
Mm.
Florida Orchestra. So after all of that, it was actually just 1 year, and I got hired by Symphony Arlington as general manager. Now in my third season here, but I did take a stint for a few months with Abilene Philharmonic to be their executive director, and I told the president of the board that this isn't the right place, right time for me. And we were living here, and I was commuting there for 2.5 hours and working, and then 2.5 hours back. So the housing market was pretty rough, even in the Dallas area of Dallas Fort Worth. We live south of Fort Worth, but it was so difficult to get the home sold. And it's a brand new home, brand new neighborhood. But I talked with my wife about it. I just said, this is nice to be in the top position for business, but want to be able to have an easier transition because we've
Yeah.
had so many difficult transitions. So I just didn't feel it was the right place or right time. I enjoyed working with the board members, and that's key too, to know that when you get in the upper position like that, you're overseeing, all of the executive side of things. You have a say in the artistic side with the music director, and then being able to mix and mingle with the board members. That's something you have to be able to relate with a lot of people. So it goes back to not just being a musician. If you get to a certain, you want to be able to just branch out. And you talked about, we're a tree. Really, that's what we have to think in those terms. So anyway, after that, because I left on good terms with every orchestra I've been with, but um, the importance also to note is when you leave a position to leave it better than when you came into it. And so they hired me right back at Symphony Arlington to be the general manager,
Hmm.
and have a great rapport with the executive director. And really enjoy his. I've learned a lot from his leadership too. So watching that. But anyway, all that to say, as you know, I'm from Arizona, so the Arizona Pops Orchestra is something I've been thinking about for some time. And the reason Pops, because Frank, do you remember when my brother and I we came up there to visit with you, and we wound up going to hear the CSO with John Williams?
Yeah.
That was that was a lot of fun. Obviously, I've heard the CSO other times, and actually, my favorite performance I've ever heard, and I've heard great orchestras, such as Chicago, New York, Boston, Berlin, London. I've heard all of them live, but my favorite performance was with the Chicago Symphony there at uh, the music hall there in Chicago to be able to um, I actually met with the librarians too,
Oh, nice.
earlier in the day. So that was neat. And I told them, I said, I'm actually going to be coming to the performance tonight. So they were really thrilled about that. So I took my wife and we heard an Alpine Symphony.
Okay.
So that was a phenomenal work to hear, and so bombastic with the organ there in the hall. Just a feeling you can't ever, when you listen to something on YouTube and
Yeah, it's
other
just not the same.
other, it's not the same. So anyway, I say all that. I love classical, but there's some about pops I love quite a bit too. And it seems like a lot of orchestras are, it's about half their concerts are almost pops these days, anyways, to get people in the
Right.
seats to
Right.
sell as many
You gotta
tickets. So I
consider
get
your
it.
audience, right?
So yeah. So anyway, that's the idea behind the Arizona Pops, and we are just getting going. ArizonaPopsOrchestra.org is the website. Again, it's in the early stages. So, and I'm juggling two positions here, two
Mhm.
jobs. So my time is limited, but trying to build the website. So again, it's something that if somebody wants to donate, obviously they can reach out to me. Um, my email is azpopsorchestraceo@gmail.com. Again, azpopsorchestraceo@gmail.com.
Great.
But
Great.
Frank,
Um,
that's really it in a nutshell. Just building this roster right now with the Arizona Pops.
all right. Awesome. Oh, Zoom's about to cut me off, so I'm glad
Okay.
we got that all in. I'll have everything in show notes for you, but thank you for making the time before you disappear off my screen involuntarily. And we'll
Frank,
have to talk
I
again.
I'd like to, yeah, I definitely would like to do that.
But thank you again, and we'll have this up for everyone to enjoy very soon. But
Uh,
thanks again.
Thanks so much, Frank. Talk to you later.